Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Creighton School of Medicine's Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Town Hall. We're fortunate to have an esteemed panel of experts tonight to share with us on the topic of healing diverse communities in the aftermath of police violence. I have the privileged position of being your moderator for this evening, so I'll be introducing our panelists and also providing some questions at the end of the panel. In just a minute, we'll introduce our panelists, but I first want to just set the parameters for our evening in this town hall event. Following the introductions of the panelists, Dr. Ron Johnson will give some introductory comments and provide some historical context for the evening. Then each panelist will be given approximately 9 minutes to share their perspective on what they see as the most pressing and significant issues related to police violence, and to offer recommendations for how we might begin to heal diverse communities following recent events. Following the panelists' initial comments, we'll open the discussion. Feel free to submit questions into the chat box throughout the course of the presentation, and I'll help to curate and direct those questions in the second half of our event tonight. Since we have a fairly large audience and we're expecting additional folks to join, please do keep your audio muted and your video off unless you're asked to come on and ask a question or elaborate on your comments. We're going to begin prior to introductions with Father Jim Clifton offering a reflection before we start.
Thank you very much, Cassie. It's an honor to be with all of you. When we pray at Creighton, we pray in Creighton's tradition, but we're always mindful of the diversity of religious traditions that are represented at Creighton and across the world. And indeed, it's not just a wonderful thing that that's true, it's an essential thing. Because in a matter like this, we need the faith and the perspective, the humanitarian goodwill of absolutely everyone. And so while we pray in Creighton's tradition, please hear those words from your own faith tradition background and add your own prayers in the quiet of your hearts as we begin. Lord our God, your people cry out to you in pain, bewilderment, frustration, anger, even despair. How wonderful it is that you have given us the grace to gather together and to bring different voices, different points of view, different expertise, because truly this challenge is beyond any one of us. It is indeed almost beyond our humanity itself. And so we ask your grace, that you pour out a full measure of your grace upon each one of us, upon your people here and everywhere, that you enlighten our minds, that you give us courage to act in the right ways, that you help us to put aside the limitations of each of our individual points of view, that you help us to remember that when we say that this challenge is complex, that is not an excuse, but a call to gather the best gifts of everyone and bring them forth under your grace, that we might address our inhumanity to one another. Bless this conversation this night and let it reinvigorate and encourage each one of us. Lord, prosper the work of our hands. Bless us and help us to be more. We ask all this because your faithfulness is from of old and your grace is eternal. Amen.
Thank you, Father. I'll next introduce our panelists in the order in which they will provide initial comments. So Dr. Ron Johnson is a professor and senior associate dean for diversity, inclusion, and belonging at Creighton University. He's also the director of team-based care and interprofessional education in the Department of Family and Community Medicine and the Department of Psychiatry. Throughout his career, he has extensive experience working with over 50 law enforcement agencies. Dr. Donna Polk has been the Chief Executive Officer of the Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition since 1991. NUIHC's service areas include Omaha, Lincoln, and Sioux City. Their programs and services include behavioral health, transitional housing, primary care, suicide and meth prevention, and many more. Mr. Mike Reiner is the Assistant Vice President for Public Safety at Creighton University. He retired from the U.S. Air Force as a colonel after serving 25 years as a Special Forces officer. During his time in the military, he was deployed to Colombia, Iraq, and Afghanistan in support of Operation Support Justice, Iraqi Freedom, and Resolute Support. Dr. R. Lee Brown is the Executive Director of Program Management for Research at San Diego State University and has extensive experience in human resources and risk management. In his current role, he mediates management, municipal, community-based, cross-cultural relationships between regional law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve. Mr. Jorge Duran was appointed Chief Investigator of the Bureau of Investigation, the law enforcement arm of the District Attorney's Office in January 2019. The Bureau is comprised of 8 divisions, including 130 sworn District Attorney investigators, as well as process servers, paralegals, and investigative technicians. Finally, Executive Deputy Chief Scott Gray is a 25-year veteran of the Omaha Police Department. He was promoted to Deputy Chief in 2017 and appointed Executive Deputy Chief in 2021. He currently oversees the Uniform Patrol Bureau, the largest division of the department with nearly 550 officers. He is a current member of the Omaha FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Johnson for some initial comments.
Thank you, Dr. Eno. Each of my esteemed panelists today you'll hear from today will either have significant experience in law enforcement or have worked significantly with ethno-racially diverse communities. I've worked with some of the largest law enforcement agencies. I'm sorry, can we get to the next slide, please? There we go. I've worked with some of the largest law enforcement agencies in the country that include Chicago, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, and my scholarly work has also included addressing issues that facilitate or compromise police officer safety. And I've also been involved in helping to make decisions related to disciplinary actions and decisions to terminate police officers. I've delivered mental health section training for critical incident training for Nebraska officers in Iowa. I'm also a member of the Nebraska Risk Assessment Cadre. Next slide, please. I was the first psychologist hired by the state of Alabama to help integrate the Alabama State Police. You may know about the Alabama State Police through their history of the Pettus Bridge. Next slide, please. Next, there we go. The Alabama State Police through their history of the Pettus Bridge in Birmingham, Alabama, and you probably have seen some of the black and white footage where the state police were brutally beating peaceful black protesters on that bridge leading to Selma. The late Congressman John Lewis was among the protesters violently attacked by the Alabama State Police in an event that has been now known as Bloody Sunday, which took place on March 7, 1965, which was 58 years ago. Next slide, please. We know about the long list of names that are linked to police violence, and now Tyre Nichols' name has been added to that list. But I want to give you some historical context of the police violence. Could we go to the next slide, please? 4 days ago marked the 67th anniversary of Isaac Woodard. It was a police violence incident that occurred on 12 February 1946. This memorial plaque signifies what happened, and the question is, why was Isaac Woodard beaten? He actually had his eyes gouged out for saying yes instead of saying yes, sir. American policing is violent, humiliating, and dehumanizing at times. The survivors' wounds, though, extend into diverse communities, and as a result of the violent actions taken by police, the wounds are reopened by them every time that there's a subsequent high-profile police incident. The purpose of this town hall is not to dwell on Black deaths due to the police violence, but to ponder the causes and consequences of the uncompromising insistence on failing to make an effort to encourage bridge building, amongst the legal profession, law enforcement, and our diverse communities. I only have a few minutes before I pass the mic over to one of my esteemed panelists here today, but I do want to touch upon a few things related to healing diverse communities in the aftermath of police violence, and my presentation falls into two categories. Next slide, please. Facts and figures on police violence in diverse communities. Next slide, please. Some of the facts in the Tyre Nichols case. 4 of the 5 officers accused of killing Nichols had previous complaints against them. Demetrius Haley, who stood over Nichols as he was propped up against a police car, took photographs, and according to the Tennessee Peace Officer Standards Commission, actually released those photos to a few other officers and to a female acquaintance. One of the officers who had been fired for Tyre's murder admitted that he lied about the reckless driving charge. He said that he witnessed and drew his service weapon on an unarmed Black man immediately upon contact with no reason whatsoever. Fire Officer Preston Hempel's body camera showed that he and another officer initiated disproportionate aggression from the very beginning of the illegal traffic stop. Hempel was not part of the beating. However, he was captured saying on video, "I hope they stop his ass." The same now fired Memphis police officers who were seen on body cam beating Tyre Nichols to death allegedly also beat a Black Army veteran just 3 days prior to this, according to a lawsuit that's been filed for $5 million. Next slide, please. Some of the figures related to policing. Officer that killed George Floyd had 18 complaints filed against him and received discipline for just 2. The New York police officer who actually killed Eric Gardner had 17 misconduct complaints at the time of Gardner's murder. The officer who shot Walter Scott in the back on video tape had previously been in trouble for with his department for the inappropriate use of a stun gun on an unarmed person. The officer that was actually convicted in the Laquan McDonald case had 29 complaints against him, many of them for excessive force. The officer that was responsible for Breonna Taylor's killing had prior complaints against them as well. In Washington, D.C., a police department, they stopped more than 200,000 people in a city of just 712,000 folks. Police in California stopped about 1.85 million people in just a 6-month period. Next slide, please. Here are some of the forms of misconduct and order of their occurrence, with excessive force and unlawful search and seizure at the top of the list. But you can see some of the issues that frequently come up. Next slide, please. Qualified immunity is a defense that basically shields officials from being sued and has been interpreted by the court so broadly that basically it allows officers to engage in sometimes unconstitutional acts with impunity. Next slide, please. There was a study done at the Pew Research Foundation, and they found that at least 2/3 of all Americans are opposed to the use of qualified immunity by police. Next slide, please. When we start looking at the costs, law enforcement agencies have insurance policies that cover them for misconduct and other kinds of things that occur in the course of their work. In total, about 25 of the largest law enforcement sheriff's departments spend more than $3.2 billion to resolve claims of police misconduct over the past 10 years. Some of the smaller agencies, actually, the cost for these policies are so high that they have to pool together in order to be able to afford to provide their own coverage for misconduct. Next slide, please. My final thoughts are that basically policing in America has always been a hot topic, but over the last few years, the argument that the system is broken has become much stronger. We're really in the midst of a national conversation about police violence and paths to reform. There are countless videos of Black men beaten and killed by police that have filled our TV screens for decades now. Some people believe that the problem shared is a problem halved. But that's both a platitude and demonstrably untrue when it comes to police violence in diverse communities. When this sort of tragedy occurs, as it did in the Tyre Nichols incident, some people unfortunately want to find a way in which they can benefit from some widespread attention to the topic itself. Policing, as I've seen it, is a job that people think that they know, but don't fully understand it, even for those who've been trained in the academies and have completed supervision with FTO experience. The night that Nichols died, he was pulled over for a routine traffic stop. When officers encountered him, he didn't have a weapon, nor was in the midst of some type of mental health crisis. He weighed 155 pounds. In other words, he posed no risk whatsoever to the Memphis police. He was killed anyway. As for the police officers who encountered Nichols, every last one of them was wearing a body cam throughout the entire interaction and subsequent beating. Nichols died anyway. At times of such a tragedy as Tyre Nichols, we can all come together and play a very important part in becoming an active in the ways in which we have to use our expertise and influence. Each of my esteemed panelists here today has expertise and influence in areas of healing diverse communities in the aftermath of police violence. It's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Dr. Donna Polk.
Good evening. I had a little difficulty unmuting myself. It is my pleasure to be a part of this esteemed group and to join you in this conversation about healing. I strongly support the concept that we must, as a community, come together to figure out how can we address some of the issues in the community that may lead to a disruption, a lack of conversation between the community and law enforcement, which is vital. I moved to Lincoln, Nebraska from Omaha in 1972, and I began what some people might call to be a community activist shortly afterwards, because my office in Lincoln was right across the street from the state capitol. And I knew about Senator Chambers, and so I made it my business to follow him and the work that he was doing in the Capitol. In 1975, a good friend of mine, Barbara Kelly, called me because her son, Sherdell Lewis, had been shot about 10 o'clock in the night by a sheriff's deputy. Sherdell was at home when a group of deputies arrived at his house, and we still don't know the reason, but he ended up being shot through his front door. I immediately responded by calling people that I knew and asking for them to come to Barbara's house so we could figure out what were we going to do. I mean, there was so little information about the incident, and all we knew is that Barbara had lost her only child at the hands of a police or a deputy sheriff at the time. I read an article from that event, and it still stuns me how the newspaper recorded what happened and how their view of it was decidedly different than those of us in the community. I do remember that there was a coroner's inquest, which I demanded that we be allowed to attend. It's similar to what we do now as a grand jury. It was held at the mortuary where Sherdell's body was. And I remember there was a Black police officer present and an elderly Black minister who slept through the entire proceedings. Needless to say, that the deputy sheriff that killed Sherdell was not indicted and was allowed to go free. Of course, we protested, including taking a caravan from Lincoln to York on the interstate, which violated state law in terms of not having a caravan on the interstate. That was the last form of protest that we were able to have at that time. In 2016, Zachary Bearhills was killed by Omaha police officers. I received a call from the Barbara Snyder's Foundation in Minneapolis saying that they had heard about it and could they come to Lincoln or to Omaha, excuse me, to talk about it. Well, I called my friend Scott Gray and asked him if he would sit in on that meeting. I thought it was important because he was a member of the police force and he joined me and he brought another officer who was in charge of training. The community, some community members felt very differently about the response to Zachary Bearhills' murder. And that was that the chief of police fired the 4 officers that were involved. 3 of them were able to get their jobs back through arbitration. And that seemed to settle things down. But, you know, when I think about it, and I think about what has happened recently with George Floyd, with Tyre Nichols, and the fact that I have 4 sons, the oldest one is a retired police captain from Prince George's, Maryland. The youngest one was the first person of color to be appointed to the district court where he now serves in Douglas County. And I think about how diverse their jobs are. One was charged with arresting and the other was charged with adjudicating. But still, as Black men, they were probably at the same risk as Sherdale and Zachary. So what is it that I think communities can do? First of all, I think part of the healing needs to facilitate a way for communities to have a better understanding of what police do and why do they do it the way they do. For example, why do they shoot to kill? Even if they know or feel that the person at the other end of their weapon is mentally ill. And we know that the mental health system throughout this nation is broken. A parent, a relative has said recently that they knew that their loved one had mental health issues, but they couldn't get services. So what do we need to do about that? Why is it that a person is killed when it appears that they could not get close enough to the law enforcement officer to kill them? Maybe they're holding a knife. So maybe if we in the community understood why don't they shoot in the leg or the arm, we would have a better understanding of their actions. The other thing I want to say is that my relationship with Deputy Chief Gray is invaluable because I have called him when I have felt that there was an injustice that I witnessed. And I just wanted him to know who the officers were that were involved, and I left it up to him as to what action should be taken. But I think the community, if it's going to start the healing process, they need to understand what it is that they need to be working on. Do we need police officers to have at least a bachelor's degree? And if they do, perhaps they need a master's. Something needs to happen so that they have a better understanding of what their job is, the risk factors in doing their jobs. And I don't know how I would feel if every day I got up, there was a potential that I could be killed in the line of duty. And people like me can maybe play a different role in making sure that our communities understand the role of law enforcement. And I have done that with former Deputy Chief or Sheriff Wayne Hudson. I had him come to our office before he left for Ohio, and I would offer this service to anyone on the force that Deputy Scott Gray would think would help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Polk. Next, we'll turn it over to Mr. Mike Reiner.
Good evening. I am Mike Reiner, Assistant Vice President of Public Safety here at Creighton. I was not a Special Forces officer. I do have to correct that. I was not Special Forces. I was a military law enforcement officer, what we called security forces in the Air Force for about 25 years. But I really appreciate the invitation to join such a distinguished panel to address a topic that stirs deep emotion in my heart and complex and sometimes conflicting conclusions in my brain. Since only a politician would attempt to propose a solution to these incredibly difficult challenges in just 8 minutes, I'm going to focus my remarks on just one aspect of the problem: the systemic flaws of the law enforcement system in the United States, while acknowledging that this is a part of a broader reality of social inequity that's rooted in centuries of chattel slavery. So we're talking about healing diverse communities in the aftermath of police violence. I posit that this cannot become a reality until the acts of violence ends. And how that happens, that's the question tonight. Well, after spending my entire working life in this profession, my conclusion is unpopular, expensive, and politically unacceptable. But remember, I'm not a politician. So my deep conviction is that for lasting healing in diverse communities across this nation, a complete reform of the existing law enforcement system in the United States is a prerequisite. Change has not and will not be achieved by incremental tweaks, nor will it come entirely from within law enforcement agencies. I conclude this because I utterly reject the premise that police violence stems from a few bad apples. As Dr. Rashawn Ray of the Brookings Institute recently wrote, bad apples come from rotten trees in policing. A healthy organizational culture does not tolerate the acts of brutality that we witness over and over. The toxic culture within many police departments is more complex than we could cover in this short session, so I'm going to focus on just a few areas for our audience to consider. First, objectively understanding the problem is crucial, and discussions like this are important for all citizens, not just those with an interest in criminal justice or even racial or ethnic equity issues. A colleague asked me, why is the School of Medicine hosting a town hall about police violence? My question is, why isn't every school or college talking about this issue? Politicians across the spectrum love to talk about being tough on crime, but they never really explain that civil rights could be trampled to drive the crime statistics for the uninformed public. So let's not be an uninformed public. I urge everyone to step out of the echo chamber of reading and listening only to those who share your worldview and read some scholarly articles by researchers from a completely opposing viewpoint. Then use your voice to discuss these tough issues and question the political candidates who will have the power to affect change. In an increasingly polarized political climate, we need voters to support candidates who can reach across the divide and collaborate on legislation that will put external pressure to change police culture. The challenge with police culture is aptly described by the rotten tree analogy. As Dr. Johnson just detailed, we repeatedly see that the so-called bad apples, the officers who commit these acts of violence that we've seen, did not just have one bad day. Their peers and their leaders knew who the bad apples were, but the culture and the organizational structure of police departments result in a tolerance for their misconduct. To take that analogy one step further, I would argue that the tree can't and won't prune itself. Removing the bad apples from the tree will likely need to come from outside the organization. Part of the reason for this is that speaking up about misconduct by another officer takes tremendous moral courage. Often the result is career suicide. The lack of an independent investigative authority is also problematic. Internal affairs divisions have the authority to investigate what is reported to them, but lack a strong incentive to do so because they work for the chief and will eventually return to another part of the department. Reporting misconduct makes waves and requires moral courage. And it can be easier for internal affairs to unsubstantiate the reported misconduct. Anecdotally, the proportion of complaints that are substantiated appears to be low in many departments. However, it's difficult to know the result of internal affairs investigations because of the third area I'm going to cover this evening, transparency, or rather the lack thereof. Attempting to get information about police misconduct is challenging, if not impossible in many departments. As public servants, the disciplinary measures taken against police officers should not be hidden from the public they serve. Police leaders and unions might cite privacy issues, yet other professions have far more transparency with records of substantiated misconduct. Perhaps an interim step toward greater transparency and toward increased accountability could be the implementation of civilian oversight groups with unfettered access to investigation results and excuse me, and disciplinary actions for officer misconduct. Equally important, these groups must have the authority to direct actions when the evidence dictates. Unfortunately, most oversight organizations in large cities are highly politicized, they lack access to personnel records, and they have no authority to direct corrective actions. The final area I'll mention tonight is the growing militarization of law enforcement, which is reflected in the equipment, the organization, and the training of today's police departments. The roots of this movement are certainly a reflection of the rise in weaponry and tactics of the most violent criminals. I don't argue that there is a need for teams that use military-grade weapons and vehicles to counter these threats to our communities. However, I believe the trend towards specialized task force to attack crime with high-end weaponry and lacking sufficient oversight or accountability is a recipe for disaster. To think that the Memphis Police Department Scorpion team had never applied excessive force before they murdered Tyree Nichols defies the imagination. In fact, a New York Times investigation interviewed other Memphis citizens, predominantly Black men, who were beaten by this specialized task force. At least 2 of the officers charged in Mr. Nichols' death had been disciplined previously after using force and failing to submit the required documentation of how it was used. The use of specialized teams may be necessary to combat well-organized and equipped criminal organizations, but they require strong leadership, external accountability, and transparency to ensure they exercise their extreme power with restraint and without violating the rights of the people they are sworn to protect. A related point is the relative lack of emphasis and resources on the low end of the spectrum. I am encouraged to see mental health professionals become increasingly employed by police departments to respond to the soaring number of calls for service related to mental health crises. However, the demand for these services far outstrips the resources available. I applaud Omaha for hiring several of these specialists, and I see great value in their work. But with only one person assigned for each precinct, the program will need additional funding to increase the number of these valuable professionals. Now, certainly the ideas I shared this evening are not a comprehensive solution to the challenges we face, but I hope that I've spurred you to consider some new ideas. And even more importantly, I hope that you will take the time to do your own research and develop your own perspectives. And most importantly, I ask that you don't sit on the sidelines. Join the dialogue to advocate for the changes that must occur for our diverse communities to heal. Thank you again for providing me with this opportunity to share a few of my thoughts.
Thank you. And now we will turn the mic over to Dr. Brown.
Dr. Brown, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for this. I feel that I'm extremely fortunate and privileged to be participating in this event this evening. It is badly needed. And as a victim of, as a child, as a victim of law enforcement abuse, and the father of a police officer who is about to retire from law enforcement, I am conflicted in many ways. I want to preface everything I say tonight by saying there's never an excuse for anyone to become or get involved in any type of abuse or violence while on their job towards a citizen if it can be avoided. And again, I want to say to you that the people who are most offended by police misconduct, for the most part, are police. A great majority of them feel that they have to own the things that other I'm not going to say a few of them, but quite is too, one is too many to be acceptable. I'm currently doing a lot of work with law enforcement to try to bring about changes in our community. I vowed after the George Floyd incident that I would do everything I could to avoid an incident of that nature in San Diego County. And knock on wood, I think we've done an exceptional job, although there's a lot more work to be done. But thanks to people like Dr. Ron Johnson, who, when he was here, wrote the wellness, he directed the writing of a wellness program that is used by the San Diego Police and going to be adopted by other major agencies that received numerous awards from the Department of Justice and other collaborative type of work, community-based work. We are hopeful that these changes that are so badly needed are forthcoming. Major reform is required and required now. I started this presentation off by saying that I'm conflicted because the people policing our communities are hired from within the same community they police. So where do we go wrong? How do we go wrong? Is it our laws? Is it policy from governmental policy or departmental policy? I, for one, am begging that we implement an educational program that will introduce officers to more than what they hear and see on the job and after work at their groups when they congregate together. I will be the first to admit that being a policeman is not a job or a career, it's a calling, because they're called on to experience stuff that the average person just couldn't do. They're not supposed to say no to saving somebody's life, putting themselves in the front of, coming at all times of night. They're here to serve. Now, this is, again, I want to say that, I want to preface, there's never an excuse for violence. That's why I'm urging, and I'm so far, I think, I've served as the vice president of the NAACP. I'm on the board of the Urban League here in San Diego in charge of civic engagement. I'm urging major reforms, and I believe that they're listening to me. I'm a member of CLERB, the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, where we review incidents of police violence or misbehavior. I can say that the leadership in law enforcement that I'm meeting with, everyone that I met with, and I believe them to be truly honest, that they are just as disgusted as I am when they or their departments are inflicted with this kind of brutality or trauma. I'm also conflicted when I think about the fact that we are experiencing what I consider generational trauma. The young people entering our law enforcement today, the research suggests that the level of anxiety and fear that they experience on a daily basis was primarily seen in mental institutions about 30 or 40 years ago. Now you couple that with issuing them a gun as an employee on behalf of the government for the protection and service to all of us. What does that say? there's some major problems in the way that we allow people to become police officers. We definitely need to bring in a better process of educating them, addressing what we call hypervigilance. We need their families to be involved in the training process as soon as possible, to see them, to experience what they're going through. The community has to be involved and needed to be called on to experience what they're seeing, what they're doing, what they're being trained. The community should be involved in all parts of the process. When an officer goes off and does something like the police officers did in Memphis or anywhere for that matter, firing those officers, I believe, is not enough. I think they should send someone in from an agency outside of that organization and evaluate or audit them from top to bottom. Because when an officer just start working, think that they can go off and bring about harm like that under the disguise of some type of street team, thinking that they're going to go out and have a license to hurt people or just act disgustingly. That's not fair. It's not right for the community because we're paying their salaries. You know, I could talk about this all evening with all of you. One thing that I'm asking for in the reforms is a destigmatization of officers seeking mental health. The minute an officer seeks mental health, he is automatically stigmatized as weak. They want to take his gun away from him. I think we should create a policy where they are paid or promoted on the basis of their intra and interpersonal intelligence. That's how well they know themselves and how well they engage others. I also think that being trauma informed needs to be introduced to all law enforcement agencies. And I'm not gonna, I have more that I can add, but after the George Floyd incident, as a person, as a Black person, I wanted to find out how people in my community of my culture feel about law enforcement generally. And I was amazed to find out that even during the Floyd, immediately after Floyd, that the Black community, for the most part, is about 70% pro or supportive of law enforcement. They're not asking for defunding. All we're asking for is that they be trained more and better, educated more, paid more. And this is research directly from Pew Research. This is information directly from the Pew Research Center. I'm going to close by saying there's a lot more that I can say about this. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're all. I like to think that we looking at this recent research on genomics, it says that we're all 99 and 9/10 the same, that all of us, and that's a very positive connection. And so we all need to be involved because injustice to one person is injustice to all of us. And again, I'm asking that you all pray for Tyre Nichols' family. Again, he was a good person. We definitely need the healing. And again, thank you for inviting me to this event. We can't do enough of this.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mr. Duran.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share with you my experiences in policing and community healing. I'd like to thank Dr. Johnson and Creighton University for the opportunity. As the introduction stated, I'm currently with the District Attorney's Office, and I've been here for about 5 years as the Chief Investigator. But before that, I spent almost 30 years with the San Diego Police Department. I worked many assignments, including internal affairs, homicide. But one of my most impactful assignment was the commanding officer of Southeastern Division. If any of you are familiar with San Diego, Southeastern Division is about 20 square miles. If San Diego City were to have an inner city underserved area, it would be Southeast San Diego. It's about 20 square mile, about 120,000 residents. 90% of the community is minority, about 30% African American, 30% Latino, and the other 30% Asian Pacific Islanders. So my experience working in an underserved community like that, and like most underserved communities, there's a high percentage of unemployment, high percentage of folks that are on supervised release, probation, parole, high incidence of gangs. And there is a lot of was a lot of conflict between the community, distrust, kind of similar issues that we're having today. But I think when I look back and I look at incidents that happened across the country, because of my involvement in the community, there was very little fallout in the community. There was very little protest, very little rioting, social unrest. I think because of the work that was done before a critical incident happened, and that's where I think I want to spend some of my time is talking about that, is not waiting until something terrible happens regarding community police relations, but to be proactive from the police standpoint, and both from the community and police standpoint, and develop those relationships before something happens on a daily basis. Because I think the community healing starts then. I think healing requires trust and open dialogue, and that takes time to build. And it's not going to happen overnight, especially immediately after a critical incident happens where a community member dies at the hands of the police. And there's different opportunities. I think engagement is a piece that's important from both sides, from the community as well as the police. I think that Mr. Reiner mentioned, folks getting involved, and I highly, support that. As a captain in Southeastern Division, I would attend many of the community meetings. We had the largest, and I wasn't aware of this until I got to Southeastern Division, was that that particular area had the highest population of undocumented folks in the county. But however, we never heard from that community in terms of calling the police because of the cultural implications from the countries of origin, where there was just a mistrust of the police. So we started to engage with the local church. We found that a lot of that community had a very religious tie. So we worked with myself and my staff, my community relations officers worked with the church, and we started having these problem-solving meetings and inviting the community members from those Latino populations to come in, and we were able to slowly develop trust and start to get radio calls, because in that community, when we drove down there, you noticed that a lot of the residences had bars on their window. There was graffiti. However, there was one interesting thing, that our radio calls or calls for service in that area were very low. And we kind of figured out, because there was this misconception that if you call the police, then you're going to get deported. So just having dialogue with the community and engaging, I think that went a long way to not just developing trust, but also to start addressing some of the underlying criminal activity or public safety activity that was happening in that community, and improve the quality of life for the residents in that community. So that ongoing engagement is definitely helpful. Other opportunities for engagement besides the faith-based organizations that are already doing work in those communities are, community members joining advisory groups. Every captain in at least in San Diego Police has an advisory board where the captain meets with different community members, community groups to discuss current issues that are happening with policing in their neighborhoods. And most importantly, I think it provides the community a voice to share with their law enforcement providers how they want to be policed. What are the issues? Because one of the most glaring things, one of the things I found as a captain was that going to our community meetings, I would gather all the crime data, look at how many robberies, how many homicides. So I was prepared with the statistics. However, when I got into the meeting, I found that the community was aware of those things and they knew that we were working on it. But what was important, what really drove the meeting was the quality of life issues, right? The homelessness, the public intoxication. So we spent a lot of time dealing with those issues. So there, to me, was an obvious disconnect. All the police, we thought, okay, this is what it's important to the community, but in reality, it wasn't. I mean, they were aware of it and they were important and they knew that we were working on it. But I think was more important is their quality of life. So I think that communication, those meetings really helped me in terms of allocating resources to address those issues. That was really important to the community. And then also I think engagement from the police perspective, I think that a lot of the younger officers that are in the field that are engaged in the day-to-day work don't get a chance to see positive feedback from the community. What I mean is they are going to radio calls, one radio call after another radio call, a robbery, a stabbing, a car wreck, and so they're going. And so who's left to go to these meetings and meet with the community and get feedback and get recognition and get appreciation? It's the brass, right? It's the captain, the lieutenant, the sergeant that normally goes to these meetings. So to the extent that we can is bring the officers that are in the community every day doing this work to come in and hear, first they hear the concerns and hear the appreciation. Because most community, I think every community group that I went to, it was always, we appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for being there. We just need some work to do. But I think that young officers that are doing this work on a daily basis need to hear that. And I don't think that that's happening. And I think just that negativity, like Dr. Brown mentioned, over time, that builds this cumulative stress over time. And eventually it leads to overreaction over a small incident. Recruitment, I think Dr. Brown talked a little bit about that. That's critical. I think that agencies and the community can help in terms of, encouraging and passing on job fairs. I remember Southeastern Division, I conducted a couple of job fairs and very few people turned out, and I think maybe because of the community wasn't behind it in terms of maybe we didn't, market it as well. But I think, encouraging the community to identify folks that will do well in terms of being good officers. And then recruiting from the police standpoint, I know that we, as law enforcement, we tend to hire criminal justice majors. I was a criminal justice major from San Diego State. But what I find is that in criminal justice courses, you take courses on, the policing and you identify, individuals as suspects, subjects, even in the court system where I work now, the district attorney's office, people are defendants, perpetrators, and then the jail system, inmates, probationers, things like that. So it kind of, labels have meanings. And I think that seeing the clients of the criminal justice system from that view can lead to other issues. So what I recommend is instead of hiring criminal justice majors to really look at maybe sociology majors. One of the as a criminal justice major, one of the courses that really helped in my police work was sociology, because I think they get into the underlying causes of crime, right? They talk about poverty, unemployment, economics, alcoholism, substance abuse, teenage pregnancy, single parent families, things like that lead to, public safety issue, public concerns issues. So as a police officer, young police with a criminal justice background, maybe they didn't have that background in sociology to really understand that we're dealing not with the issue itself, but we're dealing with the symptoms of a broader problem. And sometimes the mindset is that the public drunkenness or the drug trafficking is the problem. Well, that's a problem, but it's not the cause of the problem. So I had an opportunity recently to go speak to San Diego State, their Criminal Justice Student Association, and that's one of the things that I shared with them. Is that if you're interested in a career in law enforcement, whether it's local or municipal policing or federal law enforcement, that I think that classes, studies in sociology would really benefit you in the long run, especially if you're trying to address social issues in underserved communities. And then finally, I like training, like Dr. Brown mentioned. I think that training, the community could help with that as well, especially with the cultural diversity training, trying to get the recruits out into the community to learn about the community that they're policing. When I first became a San Diego police officer, I was hired from Houston, Texas. I've never been in San Diego before, but in short order, I found myself patrolling a community in San Diego that I had no idea what the history was of that community, what the demographics were of the community, the cultural makeup of that community, or more importantly, the history with policing in that community. I had no idea what the background is. All I knew is that, hey, I'm getting a radio call to go to this disturbance, and I was going to handle it, per policy, per protocol, and per the law. So I think that having police recruits have an understanding or training in terms of the communities that they are going to police, and especially with regard to what's the history of that community in terms of relationship with the police, and training also not just in cultural diversity, but the escalation as well, that in some cases you don't have to have the last word as a police officer, that you can bring the temperature down, that you don't have to start each conversation at a 10, regardless of the previous call that you came to where you are emotionally charged. The current conversation doesn't require that level of agitation. So de-escalation training, and finally, trauma-informed policing or trauma-informed, understanding the social dynamics, the emotional dynamics that people that we're dealing with are also emotionally charged, because they are the reason the police were summoned is because something obviously is wrong, and anxiety is heightened, fear is heightened. So understanding how to approach folks, individuals that are in that condition, so we don't re-victimize folks that we're trying to diffuse. And then finally, it's just what Mr. Reiner suggested, is just to get involved. The community there's opportunity for the community always to get involved with policing, because at the end of the day, the service that the police organizations are providing is to the benefit of the community. So I think every community member should feel like they have a voice in talking about how they want to be policed or how they want to see their community policed. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And then we'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Gray.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for the invitation. And thank you, Creighton, for hosting this very valuable event. I've kind of thrown out my comments because I've been steered just a little bit different way from some of the comments of the other speakers tonight. And I think there's some other valuable points to make. Before I do that, though, I just want to recognize and kind of bring everybody's attention to the unique aspect of this panel. We have Dr. Donna Polk and Dr. Brown, and I've never met Dr. Brown until just tonight, but I had no idea that he had a son in law enforcement. So they both are leaders in the Black community, very well respected, and have sons in law enforcement. So they have a very unique perspective on the issue that we're discussing tonight. And I think they both have very valuable insight and perspective that we need to tap into a little more as we go into question and answer, and maybe for some future events. But Donna and I go back quite a ways, so I know the history of her family, and I've always really respected her input, and because I know she is a community activist. She said it, she's right. But she's also understands law enforcement and the justice system and how policing works or doesn't work in our country. So I appreciate her leadership as well. So let me just talk about what I think we need in law enforcement. I think we need a change in mindset. And what that looks like is a number of different things. If we can go back quickly, you know, the policing model throughout the 70s, 80s into 90s. I started in law enforcement in 1996. Was zero tolerance. I mean, that's what everybody preached. Even the federal government at the time, because I remember we had grant programs that were called Weed and Seed, and some of you may remember that concept. And it was weed out the bad and seed in some good things through different programs. And it was all based on zero tolerance enforcement. And how do you do zero tolerance? You arrest everybody you possibly can in an area. You go into a high crime area and you enforce every small criminal statute and ordinance there is, and hopefully you're scooping up the bad guys in the process. Well, obviously what we've learned over the years is that does more harm than good. You're scooping up a lot of people that don't need to become involved in the criminal justice system. So we have over the years begun to shift from that enforcement model. I think there's a lot of agencies that still spend too much time in that kind of model. A lot of people a lot of agencies talk about community policing, but don't really practice it. They say they do. But I think part of that mindset is really being accessible to the public, even when it's uncomfortable. As a law enforcement leader, I have to be willing to get involved in very uncomfortable conversations, go out and meet with people, and you know, get yelled at, things like that, because there's a history of trauma and violence that that I don't necessarily understand. I didn't experience it growing up, so I have to learn that and allow people to maybe vent a little bit and learn from their life experience, and be able to apply that to how I lead a police department. Just quickly, a few years ago, I got invited to it was a panel discussion called "What If Ferguson Happens in Omaha?" And at the time, I was captain of our Northeast precinct, which in Omaha is primarily African-American, a lot of poverty, drugs, gang violence, that kind of thing. So my deputy chief at the time asked me to go. I gladly went. But it was on the panel was a University of Nebraska professor, Sam Walker, who's kind of a specialist in criminal justice matters. There was an activist from Chicago and a couple local activists, if you will. And there were about 300 people in this room. And pretty much all of it was directed at me. So it was a very heated, anger-filled conversation. But I took the time, and this meeting lasted over 3 hours. It was the most mentally draining meeting I've ever been to in my life. But I stayed and I had conversations and answered the hard questions. And from that, I gained a lot of political capital, if you will, from the people that I worked with in North Omaha and elsewhere. In fact, the guy from Chicago there, the community activist, came up to me after the meeting and said, "This never would have happened in Chicago. We would never get a senior leader from Chicago Police Department to be part of this panel." But I just felt it was important that they had that access to an upper commander in the police department and somebody that's willing to take those questions and have those conversations. And I think more of that needs to be done in law enforcement all across the country. Even if agencies say they're doing it, there needs to be more of it. You know, we can say that that use of force is low in law enforcement, that deaths in law enforcement incidents don't happen very often, but they still happen, and we have to do everything that we can to get that number down to zero. So we still have to have those conversations and look at Mr. Duran talked about some key areas, recruitment and training, and how we do those things. They have to be done correctly. If you look at some of the biggest police misconduct scandals, if you will, in our country, Rampart Division, Miami River Cops, a lot of people don't know about that one. That's back in the 80s. A lot of the key findings after these, they found that they were in large part due to poor hiring practices, just getting the wrong people in the door. And I'm hearing all kinds of rumors about Memphis, and it'll be a while before we know the truth there. But I think that there's a lot that needs to be looked at within agencies across the department on how they hire people, how they conduct background investigations. Do they do psychological screening? Do they do polygraphs? And a lot of people don't understand polygraphs, but I'm telling you, they are the key to weeding out candidates that should not be in law enforcement. And there's a lot of agencies that don't do them just because of the expense. And then just another quick part on mindset before I wrap up, just so we can get on to the questions. But I mean, one thing that and Jorge talked about it a little bit is the mindset of officers is they're going call to call to call all day long, and they're only dealing typically with bad things or bad people. And they get caught up in this mindset that everyone's bad then. And that's not the case. Most people that have contact with law enforcement are just, they're requesting a police report, or they're maybe involved in a traffic accident or something like that. These aren't bad people. They're just having some kind of bad incident. But too many police officers get wrapped up in this mindset that everyone's bad. Everyone's out to get me. Everybody, everything's a danger. Some of that's true sometimes, but they can't go into every contact that they have with a citizen thinking the worst of that person or the worst of the situation. They've got to be able to process the information and look at the totality of the circumstances, evaluate things more in an even and fair mindset, so that they are treating that person with dignity and respect. And I'm going to wrap up there to move on to some questions. I'm sure we're going to have some good dialogue.
Thanks, Deputy Chief Gray. So I know that you've all been very intently listening, so I'd like to ask that you just spend a little bit of time here thinking about some questions while we have the opportunity with all of these experts on the line with us. I'm going to kick it off with one question and give you a little bit of time to think about and go ahead and direct your questions to the chat. So Dr. Johnson kind of concluded his remarks talking about qualified immunity, or the defense that shields officials from being sued following these types of incidents, and indicated that 2/3 of Americans are opposed to the use of this by police officers. Just wanted to get some feedback from the panel on your thoughts on kind of eliminating qualified immunity. Would it help? Would it not help? What are the limitations? And I'll let whoever take that.
There are two sides to that question. One of them is obviously when you eliminate that as a possibility, and some places have tried to do that, unions really fight strongly against it, but there's a concern that there might be an increase in the number of frivolous lawsuits that are filed in an effort to sort of take advantage of that. On the other side of that coin, it's an effort to try to create greater accountability for officers who might be more inclined to abuse their authority as police officers.
I'll jump in real quick. I mean, I see both sides of this one because it does, I think, prevent some of those frivolous lawsuits that could impact how policing is done. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know how many lawsuits in law enforcement are still pretty rare. I mean, there's not, do they happen? Yeah, but the average police officer is not gonna get sued in their career, more than likely, if they're properly trained and acting appropriately. I'll tell you, I know in Colorado they eliminated it at the state level, and it has had from what I'm told, it has had a detrimental impact there, with a lot of officers leaving, a lot of chiefs of police retiring, that kind of thing. So I think it could have a negative impact on policing in some aspects.
In California, there is a movement to try to at least mitigate that. There is a case out of San Diego County, unfortunately, it's Hayes versus County of San Diego, and that allows victims of families of victims that were killed by law enforcement to sue law enforcement officers when they acted without due regard for the safety of the person that lost their lives. And it had to do with a mentally disturbed individual that was threatening suicide. The person's sister called, two sheriff's deputies showed up, and they had information that the person was mentally ill and some other background information. However, the deputies went in, the person armed themselves with a knife. Of course, officers drew their weapons, and the individual came up then with a knife, and they wound up killing him. The courts ruled initially, they ruled with the deputies, they had qualified immunities, but later on they went out to under appeal. They lost the case, and they ruled that the deputies were liable civilly because they had information about the person's mental disability, and they could have done more to prevent, basically to de-escalate the situation that resulted in deadly force being used. So that's a 2013 case. And then more recently, criminally, under 835 of the Penal Code, there's been some changes that would make police officers liable criminally if under the similar circumstances. However, on a criminal side, and it's typically dealing with folks that are mentally ill, that if we don't take into consideration the factors that person may not be capable of following orders because of their mental state, and then officers wind up using force, they could be criminally charged. And now in my current position in the district attorney's office, we have charged at least one sheriff's deputy with murder while I've been here.
You know, one thing I'd like to say, several years ago, I had just a one-day event dealing with domestic violence. And I had a police officer from Pine Ridge, which is a large Native community in South Dakota. And we were talking about police shooting people and how do you determine if you're gonna use your weapon. And he said something that was very interesting and I think relevant to our conversation tonight. He said, when I take out my weapon and I look down the end of it, and if that person looks like me, I am less apt to pull the trigger. Meaning that if the person on the other end of that gun is also Native, he's probably going to figure out another way to address the problem. And so I've heard people talk about trauma. I've heard people talk about diversity. And the most important thing that I've heard tonight is the need for education so that people understand these concepts. What is diversity and inclusion? And what is mental health? What is the difference between mental health and mental illness?
I would, if you don't mind, I would like to emphasize, this is Dr. Brown, the amount of fear and anxiety that officers are experiencing. a lot goes into that. And I'm very concerned with that. I don't, I think we need more in terms of wellness programs. We need to extend the training like in Europe. We need to look at different phases of maybe arming officers and putting them through some type of training on how to better engage people. And then after they pass all of that, maybe consider issuing weapons to them. I have a nephew who retired from the police department in Frankfurt, Germany. And they went to school before you could become a policeman there in Germany. You had to go to school for at least, I believe, 4 years, 2 years, or over here it's a matter of maybe 6 months or 18 weeks or whatever. And but there and before they can be promoted, they have to go back to college for another 2 years. And I think the incidence of hypervigilance and is much lower than it is in this country. I remember when we were doing the wellness program under Dr. Johnson's guidance, leadership. We met with officers in all of the domains. We met with them at the bars. We met with them everywhere they congregated. And it was a very interesting feeling listening to them and trying to really hear what they were trying to say to us. The report was, I think the program was well done. There's a lot more that can be done to enhance it. Again, I believe that the most important part is, I think our society, we have to co-determine. All of us should be involved, be working with this, in this area. It's all of our responsibility, not only just the police, but all of us, because we pay them. They're there to protect us. We expect a certain amount of we expect very ethical. We expect them to behave in a certain way. One of the people who was supposed to be with us tonight, he's not here. He's ill, but I learned a lot from him and from my son about the amount of fear and anxiety that the average police person walking around with today with the gun on. And I don't know when we're going to start addressing that, but I know like Dr. Donna said, that we definitely need to do more in terms of educating them. And I mean, putting them through a BA program, making sure they all are educated so they know more about people, about cross-cultural competence, about compromise, about mediation, about, because I once had a police chief to tell me in San Diego, I asked him what his biggest fear was after he became chief of police and had been the chief for 5 years. He said, my biggest fear is a 21, 22 or 23-year-old person who's just been issued a gun and a badge and told, now go out and police. He said, they don't know what they're doing. I'm so afraid of them myself, those people. And as a chief of police, I'm even more afraid of what they're capable of doing. So we need to do more in that area for sure. Thank you.
Just
Thanks,
real
Dr. Brown.
quickly, it's very expensive to hire, train police officers. It's a very expensive enterprise. And I know that immediately following the George Floyd incident, and probably even with Memphis, IACP is reporting a significant drop off in terms of being able to hire qualified police officers. And so what happens, I'm sure it's true in Memphis, there is a decline sometimes in the standards that are used for hiring police officers, which makes it even more difficult in terms of trying to get the same quality of police that we've had and been accustomed to.
Yeah, so a related question was asked in the chat. Currently, it seems many departments are understaffed. How do we balance maintaining a sufficient police force while also changing recruiting and/or hiring practices? And we'll give this question maybe a minute or two if one or two of you would like to respond.
Yeah, just really quickly, I'll talk about that since we just started a recruit class at our agency. We can fit 60 people in our recruit class. We hired 39, and that was because just the quality of the applicants wasn't there, and we're not gonna budge on that line. That's something I've told the chief over and over. I'd rather operate short than have poor quality people that are gonna cause us more problems down the line. And that's just quickly, that when I came out in 1996, there were over 3,000 people that took the test to become a police officer here in Omaha. We just finished up a application period, and we have about 300 applicants. So we went from 3,000 to 300. That's not good, because what we typically see is about 5% that make it from the testing phase all the way through to hiring. So, and in Omaha Police's case, we are 104 officers short right now. So it is a crisis, and this is all across the country. It's not just Omaha.
I applaud Scott's comment there about quality over quantity. But we're going to have to go through a cycle for a while where there is going to be real challenges in recruiting because of the reputation of police. And it's a vicious cycle, because as we continue to have fewer police on the streets, they're going to be more stressed. They're going to have less time for the training and education that they need. And so to right this ship, it's going to take money, and it's going to take an investment in, getting the right people. Scott talked about hiring, the importance of not sacrificing hiring. And I've heard some of the stuff as well about Memphis's Scorpion unit, and that they were probably shouldn't have been hired in the first place. But I got to go back to one of the points I made. You can have the best hiring in the world, but if you don't have some sort of transparency and accountability from an external organization that can look in and change that culture, you can have the best people, and you got to get rid of the bad apples. Because even with the best screening, even with the poly, even with the psych eval, there are going to be people that come in, and it's just the nature of human nature. You're going to have some bad apples, and there's got to be some way to prune that out of the tree. And it's not happening. It's just not happening in police departments from within. We need to have some sort of civilian oversight that has teeth, in my opinion.
I believe, as a community person, I believe the communities must take a greater role in addressing issues of crime and criminality in their communities. My God, we don't, as Black people, we don't manufacture guns, we don't manufacture bullets. You go into pawn shops, you don't see Black people giving out the guns. We must ask, where are these guns coming from? I mean, imagine being a scared police officer from some little country town in Nebraska that you all don't have in California, and you come to Omaha, you're scared to death anyway, because you didn't go to church with a Black person, you didn't go to school with a Black person. All you hear about what gang members and this and that. And I try to tell the community, when are you going to take some responsibility for cleaning out your community? My goodness. I mean, they're overwhelmed with fentanyl, finding people dead in their cars from ODing with fentanyl laced drugs. Come on now. I mean, and I'm sorry to get so emotional, but the final thing I want to say, like I said, my oldest boy was a police officer in Prince George's County, Maryland, which has its own little reputation among the force. But as a mother, I told him, just because you're carrying that gun and you have that badge, you still treat people with respect. And because they had the ability to drive police vehicles, they could take them home. And I wondered why we don't do that in Omaha. But imagine if your neighbor was on the police force and they parked their car in their driveway every day. Okay? And it's just like my son, the judge. I tell him, yes, you have a person charged with murder standing in front of you, but you still call that person Mr. or Ms. You don't just call them defendant. They're human beings until they leave your courtroom, and then that's up to somebody else. But I'm telling you, we have to, as a community, take some responsibility for what's going on.
Okay, we're coming up on time here, so I'm just going to throw out one more question to the panelists and give each of you 30 seconds, which seems unfair given your expertise. But we have a lot of really engaged, really excited, service-oriented folks on here. If you could give us just one action plan going forward for how to get involved in this community engagement effort or to get involved in reform, what would it be? And I'm just going to do a little roll call. So, Dr. Polk.
Oops, don't wait until something happens. See if there's a group within Creighton or in your neighborhood or your church that shares your beliefs about enforcement. Get involved in that. And then call Deputy Chief Scott Gray.
Okay, Mike Reiner.
Well, I got Scott's number right here on my cell, so I can call him. Scott was my first precinct captain when I first got here. He was then the Northeast precinct captain, so known him every minute of my time at Creighton. I would go back again to get educated, talk about it with others, and then get involved as far as pushing for political change for whatever things that you support. Personally, I believe that there needs to be legislation to force transparency and to provide civilian oversight that has accountability and has some teeth. But whatever you agree with, put politicians in place that are actually going to make those moves. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Brown?
I would just like to echo everything that's been said before you called on me, especially what Ms. Donna, Dr. Donna said about don't wait until things are a problem, get involved now, you know, go out, meet with the people at the academy. You know, we have these young officers patrolling an area, don't know the area. They don't have the cross-cultural competencies. They're not invited into places on the schedule while they're out patrolling. They say, hey, look, why don't you come and have lunch with us over here at the the Urban League's lunchroom, or you know, we can buy some, we can get you some coffee and some whatever you want to eat. We just want to talk to you and learn about your challenges and how you plan to engage us. What are you all about? How can, yeah, Dr. Donna has it right on. We need to do a lot more of that. And remember, these people we're hiring to police us are some of our mostly, on the most part, a lot of our former neighbors from our neighborhood. And she's right about the police car. My son is about to retire. He's been in charge of internal affairs for Miami PD for a number of years now. And it's very interesting talking to him on a daily basis. Thank you.
Mr. Duran?
Thank you. Yes, I think I agree with reaching out and engaging, not just with the police department. A lot of times, I think policymakers listen more to community members, their constituents. Sometimes it's difficult for chiefs of police and police administrators to request different resources. But I think when they have the support of the community, that either more training, better recruitment standards and things like that, I think that the policymakers support in that regard, I think will go a long way to kind of initiate some reform.
Thank you. Finally, Deputy Chief Gray.
Well, I would say become educated on police topics. 21st Century Policing Report is a good report to look at for some good ideas on police reform and where it needs to go. I've been reading a publication from just about 3 months ago that DOJ did on contacts between police and the public. It's got a lot of good information in it. But just know those things, understand them. It helps you in your conversations with your police leaders in your community. Don't be afraid to get involved and ask those hard questions. But one thing in the 21st Century Policing report that they noted is that for all of these reforms to take place, the community has to have buy-in and be willing to reach out and take part in this as well. So there, it kind of has to be a two-way conversation and a little give and take by everybody to make this a reality.
Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Johnson to conclude.
I just want to thank all of our panelists for their participation and those of you that attended today. Obviously, this is a very complex topic, but I will just say quickly in terms of what could be done. I'm not saying it's a solution, but I would say that it's important not to always assume that race is the deciding factor in some of these issues. In fact, I was working with LAPD around the time that the Rodney King incident broke out. Chief Gates at the time went into and kind of anticipating that there were going to be riots, which there were. And so to advance that, he went out and removed a white precinct captain from predominantly Black district. And what happened as a result, and placed a Black precinct captain into that same district. What happened was the community that had a relationship with this white precinct captain became outraged and protested it. And so Chief Gates had to go back and reverse that decision. And then what happened in this case, the white precinct captain had a relationship with the community and spent a lot of time engaging that community and had credibility in that community. So that's why sometimes it's important to recognize it's not always a race issue. It's how you work to develop relationships. And this captain had worked very hard at developing those relationships. Again, I want to thank you. Obviously, we have not solved the problems here today, but we've at least created a discussion forum where we can look at some of these very tough, thorny topics. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Eno, for putting up with me during this time and all of your work in moderating this session. Thank you very much.